Okay, so hi everybody. I'm the account director at WilsonCooke, and as Louise said, today I'm going to talk about just a recap of the content sessions that I've done in previous months, and a top line overview of how we go about measuring content across certain channels. So what is content? So content marketing is a marketing technique of creating and distributing valuable, relevant and consistent content to attract and acquire a clearly defined audience, with the objective of driving profitable customer action. So why do we use content? So content is fundamental to all aspects of the marketing mix, and having a strategy will help you have better quality content which stands out. So it's always good to have a content plan or a content calendar in place to make sure that you're posting consistently and the message is consistent, rather than it just being kind of a haphazard approach. It's a means to engage with your customers emotionally, and it brings all aspects of marketing together. So everything is made up of content. Everything around us, everything in the advertising world is made up of content. So along with the four that we've got there, it can be user-generated content, it can be podcasts, it can be webinars, it can be live streams, it can be your PPC ads, it can be display. It's literally everywhere. So for the purposes of the meeting today, I'm going to focus on social, blogs, outreach, and video, and the best ways or the key ways that we would measure those particular forms of content. So the first thing you need to do is define your goals. So unless you know exactly what it is that you want to track and why you want to track it, and you've set your targets, then it's impossible to know what to measure. So your content goals across all channels should align with your business goals and with each other. So content, as a general rule, sits at the top of the purchase funnel. So it's more about driving awareness and interest. So your business goals, for example, may be about driving brand awareness, thought leadership, and then sales and leads. And within those, your content goals would be specifically about reach and engagement. You can also look at driving conversions and ROI from your content, but that should be less of a factor, and it should be more about driving brand awareness, reach and engagement. Sorry. So what is your analytics framework? So check your content to see how well you've tailored it. Sorry. You need to make sure that you're driving synergy across all of your channels and that they're all working well together. So for example, is your content consistent across all of the channels that you're running against? Is it relevant? Is it relevant for your brand, and is it relevant for your audience? Is the style that you're using and the tone, is that also relevant for your audience? Is it efficient? So are you getting your message out there clearly and efficiently, and is it being brought across quickly, given that consumers these days generally have quite a short attention span? Will it be influential to your consumers? Look at your goals. Are they aligned with the business goals? Are your goals married up across all the different forms of content that you're using? And what challenges are you looking to overcome with your content? So that can be twofold. It can be the challenges that you're seeing within the business. So what do you want your content to achieve for your business? And it can also be the challenges that you want to give or overcome for your clients. So do you want your content to be about driving brand awareness? Do you want to inform the user? Do you want to educate the user? So it's about making sure that all of this is consistent and relevant across all the channels that you are using. So how do we measure content? So I'm fairly sure if I asked all of you on this call how you would measure content, you would probably all come up with something slightly different, but there would probably be a general theme. So some of the key ones within here are things like brand awareness, likes, engagements, inquiries, shares, organic traffic, views, share of voice. So there are millions of ways that we could look to measure content, and there are millions of different types of content, and we could talk about this for hours. But for the purposes of the four channels I mentioned before, we're going to look at some very specific types of measurements, and you need to make sure that the way you're measuring your content is relevant to you, and it's also relevant to the content that you are running. So how do we start measuring what matters? So there's three main steps to the process of measurement. So the first one is your data collection. So once your activity is up and running, you can look to start collecting data. It can be daily, it could be weekly, it could be monthly, it could be however often you want to collect the data. So the first process is gathering the data, and then once you've gathered the data, you need to start analysing and interpreting that data. You need to compare it to the targets you set at the beginning, and you also need to compare it to all the various channels. So has one particular form of content outperformed another? Has one particular channel outperformed another? Did this post work better than that post? So it's all about gathering the information and the insights. And once you have all of that information and insight, you can then take that forward into learnings and into future pieces of activity and future pieces of content. So moving into the 4 channels that I mentioned previously as to the best ways that we would generally look to measure these channels. So social, and Becca, feel free to jump in here. So the key measurement when we're looking at social is engagements, and this would be including engagement rate. So generally speaking, engagement is inclusive of things like comments, likes, and shares. So your engagement rate is how engaged your audience is with your content, and the higher that is, the more relevant the content that you're posting is to your user base. We can also look at using social listening tools, and these will give you an overall view of things like comments, likes, and shares all within one platform. And then we can also look at things like Google Analytics. So whilst I said things like traffic and conversions aren't necessarily key when you're looking at the performance of social, they are there to be tracked when you're pushing users through to site. So there is the option for users to click through to site, and then we can use Google Analytics to track those visitors and track those conversions. Video, so similar to social, obviously within social there's many different channels you can use. There's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's Pinterest, whatever it may be, and then within that there's also lots of different formats. So there can be survey ads, poll ads, video ads, competition ads, whatever it may be, and maybe you'd look to track each one of those slightly differently. Similarly with video, so obviously when you're running video, you want to look at views. So video can run as in-stream, it can run as out-stream, it can run as within the content of a website. You can also look to run on things like YouTube, or you can look to run as things like broadcast VOD, so things like 4OD, video and across video players and that kind of thing. And again, how you track those would be different depending on where you were running. So yeah, so in terms of video, I guess the main thing you want to drive there is views, but video in a way that text isn't. Video is a very emotive channel to use. So we can really, push the users' buttons and get them really sharing the content and commenting on the content. So from a B2B point of view, you're probably looking at more along the lines of instructional videos or educational videos or tutorials, how-tos, that kind of thing. And from a B2C perspective, you might be looking at things that generate a specific emotion. So do you want to, is it going to be funny? Is it going to be sad? You really want people to have a reaction to that content and share it across their other social channels. And then similarly with social and looking at Google Analytics, you can track visits to site and any conversions that come directly from that video. Again, that's always there to be tracked, but it wouldn't necessarily be the main KPI that you would look at for video content. And then moving on to blogs. So when we or the clients we work with write blogs, we generally tell them to focus on specific keywords. So what keywords would you want to rank for in the organic listings? What keywords would you want your site to appear against? And then we would recommend that you build blog content around that. So the key way that you can track the success of blogs is through your movements in the organic rankings. This isn't something that's going to change overnight. It's more of a long-term process, but it's definitely something that you would track against those particular keywords, with the aim being that you'd want to appear within the top 10 rankings, so on page 1 of the organic rankings. Again, people can comment and people can share blog content, and then generally, because the blog content sits within your client site, dwell time is also a key factor that you can look at. So how long are people actually spending on the blog pages, engaging with the content? And then similarly, how many people have clicked on the organic link and visited the site. And then outreach is kind of the sister of blogs, really. So if you're writing blog content, there's no reason, depending on what the content is, that you can't make that into outreach. I would generally look to change the tone. So if a blog is sitting on your site, it can be more promotional, it can be more sales led, and it can be really about pushing your business and your offers. Whereas outreach, it generally needs to be something that's less promotional. It's more thought leadership and more opinion led, and is more appealing to the industry as a whole. And the key thing we would look at when looking at outreach is your domain authority. So your domain authority is your ability to rank, and it's how much of an expert you're deemed to be in that particular sector and industry. So the higher the domain authority, the better, really. And in order to achieve that higher domain authority, we need to be using or pushing backlinks pointing back to your site. So obviously, when we're running outreach, we want to be using publications that have high domain authorities in their own right, because that will help us then drive valuable backlinks back to your own site. So that's something, again, that isn't going to happen over the course of a couple of days. It's something that's going to happen over weeks and months. But the more outreach that you push out there on relevant publications with high domain authorities, the more of a positive impact that's going to have. And then just looking at trust flow score and citation flow score. So these two generally go hand in hand. And again, I'm not an expert on these, and these will be gone into in much more detail in the SEO session we run in the coming weeks and months. But trust flow score and citation flow score. So citation flow score is the is based on the number of backlinks you have going back to your site, and the trust flow score is how trustworthy or what the quality of those backlinks, I guess. So generally, you want those two to be of a similar level, because if you have a huge citation flow score and a very low trust flow score, that means you're driving a large number of backlinks back to your site, but the quality is very low, which could actually end up negatively affecting your domain authority. So in an ideal world, you'd like those two figures would be of a similar level. And then again, as with all the other ones we've talked about before, you can use Google Analytics to track people that have clicked from your outreach or clicked on one of your backlinks back to your site, and any conversions that have come from that. And then for people who wanted to go into SEO and delve into the site in more detail, there's tools like SEMrush and Moz. So Moz Domain Authority was actually developed by Moz. So there's much more information that you can get there in terms of your domain authority and the quality of your backlinks and where your backlinks are actually coming from. So just moving into on-site behavior. So most of the content pieces we've looked at are, apart from blogs, they're external, they're third party, and then there's obviously on-site behavior that you can look at in isolation as well. So we can look at heat maps and click patterns by inserting particular forms of technology onto the site. So if we look at this one here, we can see the dark red, or the red, is where people's activity is most centered. So this is where they're clicking, and we can see that it's mostly around the nav bar. So this is really useful information. This can really help to inform UX, so how you set up your site based on how users are using it and how people's kind of eyes naturally rove around a site. Page views and unique users. So obviously page views is your users, it's your traffic. So essentially that's what you want. You want that to be going up over time. Google Analytics conversions. So again, conversions can be anything you want to track, essentially. So it can be get a quote, it can be order a sample, it can be download a brochure, it can be click to email, click to phone, whatever it may be. That's your conversion. This can always be tracked in Google Analytics, provided you've got Google Analytics set up on your site to track all of this. And then dwell time, which again can also be pulled out of Google Analytics to see how long people are spending on your site and how well they're actually interacting with your content. And we can also track dwell time on particular pages as well to see which areas of your site are driving the most interactions. So not to forget your competitors. So what does competition mean to you? So generally, on occasion, people think that they have a list of competitors, but those list of competitors aren't necessarily the people you're actually competing with in the search rankings. So it's worth keeping an eye on the people that you deem to be your true competitors, but also keeping an eye on new competitors to market and the ones that are actually competing with you in the search rankings. And the information is out there for you to get hold of to see how your competitors are doing. So as I mentioned, Sprout Social before, you can always look at using social listening tools like that to see what they're doing online, how often they're posting and how they're performing. And domain authority of competitor websites, it's freely available on tools where you can see what their domain authority is. So it's always worth keeping an eye on what your competitors are doing, how they're doing it, and are they doing it well, and how can you adjust your behavior in response to that. So it's always keeping your competition in your line of sight. So finally, when you're looking at putting content together and how to measure that content, you need to decide several factors before you can start looking at how to measure it. So you need to decide what your overall business objectives are and how your content reflects that. You need to make sure that your tone of voice is consistent with your audience and with the channels that you're using, and that you're not confusing the audience. Is your messaging consistent across all channels, and is it consistent across the business, and is it relevant and consistent with your audience? What do you actually want to get out of your content? Is there a specific action you actually want to get out of your content? Because this may differ depending on which channel that you're using. So you need to decide the key metrics that you want to measure and where the content that you want to run fits within that. And then ultimately you need to look at setting the targets. So once you've decided what all of those points need to be, then you need to set your targets. And only once all of those things are in place and you've set the content in motion, can you then move on to gathering the data, analysing it and measuring it to decide whether it's succeeded for your business. And that's everything. Any questions?
I have, as always, but I will see if anyone else has got any questions. If you don't want to speak, I'm happy for you to drop it in the chat, and I can ask you, Laura, separately, or I can ask my questions that might inspire other questions? I'll go with mine while everyone's frantically typing away their questions. So I've got 2 questions, Laura, if that's okay. I've been saving them up. So you mentioned a couple of times there around domain authority. So what is a good domain authority? What would you say we need to be looking for, or what's the go-to with that?
So domain authority is a score from 1 to 100. So generally speaking, kind of 20 to, well, I'd say 30 to 40 is kind of where is good. Is kind of where you're initially aiming to be. 40 to 60 is very good, and then I think 60 and above is excellent. So you do have some publications that are in the 90s, but they're the likes of the Telegraph, the BBC, so kind of huge, kind of nationwide, national websites and publications. So I think anything above 30 and 40 is kind of is good, but there's always room for improvement.
Okay, so my other one is something that I support quite a lot of yourself and the team with is outreach. So I often get asked the question, or I can hear a lot of our clients ask, you know, how often should they do outreach, or what should that look like? So have you got any best practice on the outreach? And I know you mentioned the backlinks and everything that fits with that.
So it really depends on the brand, really, and it depends on things like budget as well, because we generally look to use publications that there is normally a small publication inclusion fee of between £100 and £200 plus VAT. So it depends on the needs of the business, but I would probably say 1 to 2 outreach pieces per month, which can be anywhere from, I don't know, 2 to 5 backlinks per month, because once this piece of content is live, those backlinks will continue to point back to the site. So there's generally a process involved. So depending on what sector or industry you are in, you can obviously decide to run within publications that are specific to that sector. So you can do research, or as I say, around publications specific to your industry, or you can also look to run across specific B2B publications that are less specific to a particular industry and broader, but they do generally tend to have quite high domain authorities. So I would probably recommend a mix of the two, having specific sector-led, industry-led thought leadership publications, and then broader B2B, and having a mix of the two, but definitely looking at running at least 1 or 2 articles per month, because generally speaking, content is king. Content rules everything, and content is everywhere, and it's really the main or only way that you're going to look to increase your domain authority over time.
Well, great. Thank you, Laura. That was my 2 questions. So if nobody else has got any other questions, like I just wanted to say, I know I've covered it a couple of times now, but we have got our next one in 2 weeks, which is the 22nd. We're reverting back to the Friday, so I will send the invites out to everybody. As always, if there's any one-to-one sessions that you want us to cover as a team with yourselves, then by all means get in touch. Keep your eye on the website and also LinkedIn and our social channels for our next events. But thank you all for joining, and we'll see you all in a couple of weeks. Take care, everyone. Bye now.